You know, in China, if you really want to insult someone, call them totally, hopelessly useless, you don't just call them a fool. You call them an Adou. It's one of history's most cutting insults. But who was the actual guy behind the name?
So Adou was the childhood name of Liu Shan, the last emperor of the legendary Shu Han kingdom during the Three Kingdoms period. For centuries, his name has literally been the definition of failure. But the real story is so much more interesting than that.
So that's what we're digging into today, the paradox of Liu Shan. Was he the bumbling idiot that history remembers? Or was he playing a much, much smarter game? A game that, in the end, he might have actually won.
All right, so how does a reputation like this even get started? Well, the legend of Adou doesn't begin with a historical fact. Nope. It begins with a super dramatic scene from a very famous novel.
This right here, this quote, captures the myth that started it all. The story goes that one of his generals, the legendary Zhao Yun, risks everything to save the baby Liu Shan from a battlefield. And what does his own father, the great warlord Liu Bei, do? He supposedly throws his own son to the ground in frustration.
Now here's the most important part of that story. It's completely made up. It never happened. It's fiction. But that one powerful image from a novel was all it took to brand Liu Shan as a worthless burden from the moment he was born. Okay, but to be fair, his reputation wasn't just built on fiction. There's a lot of historical evidence that seems to scream, yes, this guy was a fool. So let's look at the case for the prosecution. And yeah, if you just look at this timeline, it looks really, really bad. Just follow the dates. His best and brightest advisors die off one by one. And what happens? The state slides right into corruption and then total collapse. A good ruler is supposed to stop that from happening, right?
I mean, the list of failures from his later years is just staggering. He lets a corrupt eunuch run wild, he completely ignores warnings from his top general, he spends way too much money, and his government basically grinds to a halt. By any standard measure, these are the actions of a terrible leader. And then you have the final act, the thing that really sealed the deal on his reputation. In 263, an enemy army shows up out of nowhere at the gates of his capital, and Liu Shan doesn't make some heroic last stand. He just opens the gates, surrenders. For many, this was the ultimate proof of his cowardice.
But if you think that's bad, his most infamous moment came later, while he was a captive. At a banquet, his conqueror turns to him and asks, kind of mockingly, "Hey, do you miss your old kingdom?" And Liu Shan's reply, "It's fun here. I do not miss Shu." That one sentence cemented his legacy as a heartless, clueless fool for all time.
So, case closed, right? The guy was a complete idiot. Well, not so fast, because if you take that exact same evidence and look at it from a different angle, a totally different picture of the man starts to emerge. Let's call this the survivor's gambit. Let's start with this one. Simple fact. That just doesn't quite fit the fool narrative. Liu Shan's reign lasted for 40 years. 40! He was the longest reigning ruler of the entire chaotic, violent Three Kingdoms period. You know, truly incompetent rulers, they don't usually last that long. And for the first few decades, he was actually pretty good at his job. He knew he wasn't a genius, so he completely empowered his brilliant chancellor, Zhuge Liang. After Zhuge Liang died, he followed his advice to the letter and managed a peaceful, stable transition of power. He even took decisive action to get rid of a corrupt official early on. These are not the actions of an idiot. So let's go back and re-examine that surrender. Was it pure cowardice? Or was it actually a pragmatic, maybe even a compassionate choice? A bloody last stand might have seemed more honorable, sure, but it would have meant the certain death of every man, woman, and child in his capital. By surrendering, Liu Shan saved all of their lives. And what about that quote at the banquet? The "I don't miss Shu" line. Well, you have to consider who he was talking to. His captor, Sima Zhao, was notoriously paranoid and had a nasty habit of executing anyone he even thought might be a threat. If Liu Shan had shown any sadness, any longing for his old kingdom, he'd have been signing his own death warrant. So was he being a fool, or was he putting on the performance of a lifetime to save his own neck? And you know what? The strategy, if that's what it was, worked perfectly. Sima Zhao was totally convinced that Liu Shan was a harmless buffoon and just left him alone. So, as a result, this ruler of a fallen kingdom didn't just survive. He was given a fancy title, a pension, and lived out the rest of his life in comfort,
eventually dying of old age. That kind of outcome was almost unheard of for a deposed king in that brutal time.
So what are we supposed to make of all this? A bumbling fool who just stumbled into good luck, or a cunning survivor who knew exactly what he was doing?
It all comes down to this paradox. Every single key event of his reign can be read in two completely opposite ways. Was the surrender an act of spineless cowardice or a pragmatic choice to save his people? Was he a heartless simpleton at the banquet, or was he putting on a calculated performance? Was his 40-year reign just a long, slow failure, or was it actually a quiet testament to stability?
Maybe the most balanced take comes from the actual historians of the period. They basically said he wasn't one thing or the other. He was a mirror. With good people around him, he was a good ruler. But when he was misled by flatterers, he was a disaster.
And that right there might be the whole key to the Adou paradox. His defining personality trait seems to have been passivity, his willingness to delegate. When he delegated power to a genius like Zhuge Liang, the kingdom was stable and strong. But when he gave that same trust to a corrupt suck-up, the whole thing rotted from the inside out. His greatest strength was also his most fatal flaw.
So I'll leave you with this question. In an era where brilliant generals, cunning strategists, and powerful emperors all met violent, bloody ends, the one guy everyone remembers as history's greatest fool outlived them all and died peacefully in his bed. So was that failure, or in a game where almost everyone else lost, was that the only kind of victory that really mattered?